And now I'll say a word, I want to say a word about fascism, because we're hearing the word used a lot. Trump is a fascist. Why is Trump a fascist? Well, because he's a nationalist. He's an ultra-nationalist. Trump wants to make America great again. Didn't Hitler want to make Germany great again? Well, the fascists were in fact nationalists. But nationalism is not a defining feature of fascism. And we can see this very clearly by simply looking at the fact that nationalism is equally common on the left as it is on the right. Gandhi was a nationalist. Mandela was a nationalist. Che Guevara was a nationalist. You're having Che Guevara week next week. I guess a celebration of a murderous thug. Very interesting. He was a nationalist. Fidel Castro was a nationalist. Every anti-colonial leader was. Winston Churchill was a nationalist. So was Abraham Lincoln. So were the American founders, to a man. So obviously all these people aren't fascists. The equation of nationalism and fascism is, I call it fake fascism. It is a big lie invented by the left to make fascism seem something other than it is. So really, what is fascism? What is fascism? Normally, if you want to know what a philosophy is, you'd say, all right, if you want to know what fascism, let's go to the great philosopher of fascism. But such a man would seem nowhere to be found. Very odd. Every other philosophy has a thinker, whether it's good or bad. Who's the philosopher of Marxism? Marx. Who's the philosopher of capitalism? Adam Smith. Who's the philosopher of fascism? Nobody knows. We can't find a textbook that tells us. Very interesting. Well, it's very interesting because the big lie is in full operation here. And here's what I mean. The philosopher of fascism is a guy named Giovanni Gentile. And although you may not have heard of him, he was considered in the early 20th century to be one of the leading thinkers of the first half of the 20th century. A major philosopher, a Hegelian, also a Marxist, by the way. And Gentile, who became Mussolini's Minister of Education, remember, Mussolini is the first fascist. Mussolini created the first fascist regime in the world. His march on Rome in 1922, 11 years before Hitler. Hitler revered Mussolini. He called him the last of the Caesars. So Giovanni Gentile defines fascism in this way. He says, everything in the state and nothing outside the state. You can now see later why Hitler called himself a National Socialist. Hitler changed the name of the German Workers' Party to put National Socialist in there. And so today, amazingly, when we hear the word Nazi, we never hear about socialism, even though socialism was actually central to fascism and central to National Socialism. In discussing this topic, Goebbels says, between nationalism and socialism, we have to go with socialism. Nationalism is the adjective, national, and socialism is the noun. In other words, we are first socialists and secondarily nationalists. These are the actual Nazis. And Gentile, in describing Nazism, uses a very telling analogy. He says, the way that fascism sees it, the state is like an organism. It's like a living creature. And every individual is like a cell in the organism. So does the cell have any rights? No. Does the cell have any value? No. The cell is only valuable insofar as it serves the state. This is the core of fascism. And I ask you, does this sound like the platform of the Republican Party? Or does it sound a little bit more like the platform of the left wing of the Democratic Party? Everything in the state and nothing outside the state. Now, let's come right to the present today and ask ourselves, where is fascism in America now? Ordinarily, we'd say fascism in America can be found in Charlottesville. Look at those white supremacists. They're neo-Nazis. That's where we see fascism. But those ragtag white supremacists are actually some of the least dangerous people in America. Why? Because they have no cultural or political power. Yeah, they can drive a car into someone, but they don't have the ability to drive a speaker off campus the way that Antifa does. They can't blockade an entire town. They don't have the mayor of Berkeley, Jesse Aragon, on their side as a member of one of their Facebook groups. They don't have powerful allies among the deans in academia in Hollywood in the Democratic Party. So if racism is really going to be dangerous, it's not only going to be allied with power, it's going to be ensconced in power itself. Look at this recent controversy about Harvey Weinstein. Now, why didn't all those women speak up before? Why now? The answer is really simple. Hollywood is a little oligarchy. It's an incestuous small family. It's like the Corleone family. And it has the power to destroy people who step outside. And I don't just mean step outside as victims of sexual harassment. If you step outside ideologically, they cancel your show. You'll never work in this town again. All those women didn't speak up because they feared they would never work in that town again. So this is the fascism of the institutions. It's the Hollywood boss that can throw you out of Hollywood and make sure you can't work in that industry. It is the powerful deans who control billion-dollar endowments who can take a young academic and turn him into a pariah. You'll never get tenure. Try to get a job in the history department in any school that anyone has ever heard of again. It's Google, which can take a guy who writes a memo contesting their diversity policy, put him on the street. We live in an America today. Now, the Nazis used a term called Gleichschaltung, which means coordination. But what the Nazis mean is we have to have the whole culture speak with one voice. No one can march out of lockstep. This was, by the way, the whole meaning. You wonder why, if you see Nazi films, everyone's doing this. Why do they do that? Why do they give Heil Hitler salutes? Why do they fly swastikas off of their balconies? The point of the Heil Hitler salute and the swastika is to signal that you are politically correct. You are in conformity with the ideology of Nazism. You're saying, I'm a good Nazi, check out my swastika. And we have that on campus today. We don't have Heil Hitler salutes, but we have the same demand that the whole culture march in lockstep. And if you're a true dissident, you're called a hater, a hater. Now, all of you here are in a position to decide for yourself, have I actually been advocating hate, or have I actually been identifying the true party of hate? I've actually been exposing hate at its core, and I've been exposing a big lie in which the party that actually perpetrated slavery, racism, and hate is now disguising itself. The very guys who poisoned the water are showing up as the water commissioner. It's kind of a scam. It's kind of a scam. And if the Democrats really cared about race today, because people will say, well, where's the racism in America now, Dinesh? Well, the racism now, I think, is sadly to be seen in what I will call our urban plantations. And by that I mean Detroit and inner city Baltimore and Oakland and all these places which, by the way, trillions of dollars have been spent. And yet many of these places are just as bad as they were in 1968. Now, do you see Jesse Jackson down there protesting? Do you see all these progressive left-wingers down there? Are they taking a knee against the school board that is running schools where no one learns anything? I was reading a book on the slave plantation, and it described the features of the slave plantation. This is Kenneth Stamp's book, the historian Kenneth Stamp, called The Peculiar Institution. And he says the slave plantation was characterized by dilapidated housing, just broken down slave quarters, by broken families, very few nuclear intact families, by a high degree of violence that was necessary to hold a place together. That's why slave plantations would have sometimes barbed wire fences. By the absence of opportunity, nobody could ever get ahead. Slavery is obviously for life. And finally, by a mood of nihilism and despair. And I ask you, are those 5 features of the slave plantation not now overwhelmingly present, tragically, not only in our inner cities, not only involving blacks, but also on Native American reservations, also in the barrios where Latinos are, and increasingly in white communities, which are economically devastated, where you have high degrees of opioid addiction. This is the America we live in now. And so my message is this. To me, the race card and the fascism card are frauds. They're being played not to have a debate, but to prevent a debate. They are efforts to try to find a group of people and say, you are the bad guys. We don't have to discuss health care or education reform or inner city tax incentives or anything with you because you're like Hitler in the 1930s. We've got to get rid of you by any means necessary. And so the charge that Trump is like Hitler is actually being used by the left as a pretext, as a cover for all kinds of inexcusable behavior, including violence, that would never otherwise be allowed or condoned. Can you imagine mainstream Democrats refusing to go to the inauguration? What if Republicans said, we're skipping Obama's inauguration? There'd be a media meltdown if that happened. So unfortunately to me, the gentleman's politics of the 1980s is gone. We're living in a much rougher environment, and when I see these physical clashes between the Trumpsters and the left and Antifa, it almost throws my mind historically back to Mussolini's black shirts of the 20s or Hitler's brown shirts of the 30s. It's a worrisome moment of American politics. My message to you is be actually on the side of the good guys. And the way to do that, the first step, don't be suckers for the big lie. Don't march in lockstep. Don't participate in left-wing Gleichschaltung. Stand up for yourself, speak up for yourself, demand that your campus exhibit a wide variety of points of view so you can truly learn and think for yourself.